The government doesn't need to announce a tax hike to make you poorer. It can print more money. It can expand the money supply, borrow more, freeze tax brackets, impose tariffs, weaken the currency, or simply let inflation quietly do the job. Your tax rate stays the same. Your paycheck might even go up, or at least look bigger on paper. But somehow rent costs more, groceries cost more, and fuel costs more. Interest eats up more of your income, and life gets heavier. The quiet genius of hidden taxation lies right here. You keep paying anyway, and no politician ever has to stand at a podium and call it a tax. In fact, nothing is as simple as it looks. Most people think taxes are something governments do directly. The income tax, sales tax, payroll tax, and property tax you pay based on what you earn. The lines on the form, the deductions from your paycheck, the receipt from the store, that's all you're supposed to know about. But states have always had other ways to collect from the public. Directly, through taxation, or indirectly, by changing the value of money, the cost of goods, the burden of debt, and the rules of the financial system. The first method is visible. The second works much more quietly. And in politics, quiet is valuable because visible taxes lead to visible anger. Raise income tax, and voters notice. Raise sales tax, and businesses complain. Raise property tax, and homeowners revolt. But what about inflation? Fees, tariffs, frozen tax thresholds, debt interest, and, most importantly, currency debasement. None of these can be tied to a single vote. They emerge slowly, spread across millions of transactions, hidden among prices, bills, rents, and interest payments. If the state can quietly erode your money's purchasing power, it never needs to raise your tax rate at all. In fact, this method is ancient. Long before central banks, paper money, and digital payments, rulers discovered that money itself could be manipulated. In the Roman Empire, coins were not just an ordinary medium of exchange, they were political tools. Rome's famous silver coin, the denarius, once contained a high proportion of silver. But as the cost of running the empire rose, armies, borders, bureaucracy, grain supplies, civil wars, oversized egos, and ambitions, the emperors ran into a familiar problem. The system needed far more money than it could comfortably provide. Raising taxes openly was dangerous. Soldiers had to be paid, the public had to be fed, rivals had to be suppressed. So the rulers chose a different path. They reduced the silver content of the coins and mixed in cheaper metals, while keeping the official face value the same. In the 1st century AD, under Nero, the denarius was debased moderately. Later emperors pushed the process further. By the 3rd century AD, during Rome's long political and military crisis, coins like the Antoninianus were severely debased. The state could mint more coins from the same amount of precious metal and use them to pay soldiers, suppliers, and officials. In the short term, it worked. In the long term, people noticed. Prices rose, trust weakened, and it took more coins to buy the same goods. The state had never passed a clear, transparent tax law, but ordinary people paid anyway, through inflation. Coin debasement was taxation stamped with the mint seal. Modern governments no longer shave silver off coins. They have far more sophisticated tools now, which is always reassuring. But the underlying logic is the same. If the state can influence the value of money, it can influence who pays. Inflation is the modern version of this hidden extraction. Of course, inflation isn't solely the work of governments. It can come from oil shocks, wars, supply chain breakdowns, corporate pricing power, labor shortages, pandemics, housing shortages, and global instability. But governments and central banks can also contribute through deficit spending, monetary expansion, ultra-low interest rates, crisis stimulus, and the pressure to make large public debts more manageable. When prices rise faster than wages, households lose purchasing power. The government may not have raised your income tax, but your money now buys less food, less fuel, less rent, less insurance, less childcare, and less peace of mind. Inflation doesn't hit everyone the same way. If you own scarce assets, real estate, stocks, commodities, or businesses with pricing power, inflation can raise the nominal value of what you own. But if you mostly hold wages and cash, inflation is a slow leak in your life. You earn, you spend, and the gap between the two keeps shrinking. Inflation also benefits debtors in some cases, and governments are among the biggest debtors in the world. If a government carries fixed debts and inflation rises, those debts become easier to repay in real terms, as long as interest rates don't rise enough to cancel out the effect. This is part of the quiet appeal. Inflation can reduce the real value of debt without an explicit default and without explicitly taxing anyone. It isn't called a tax because nobody votes for it, but it collects from everyone who holds money. Then there's debt itself. Governments borrow to fund wars, crises, pension systems, healthcare, infrastructure, stimulus packages, and budget deficits. Borrowing can be useful sometimes, it's even necessary. A state that refuses to borrow during a war, a depression, a pandemic, or an infrastructure collapse isn't being responsible. It's simply choosing a different disaster. But debt is never a magic fix. It pushes the bill forward in time. The spending happens now, the payment comes later. That payment comes back in the form of higher taxes, reduced public services, inflation, austerity, higher interest costs, or slower growth. After the Napoleonic Wars, Britain carried a massive public debt, but also built a powerful bond market that helped finance the empire. World War I and World War II were financed through borrowing, taxation, and money creation on a massive scale. After the 2008 crisis, and again after COVID, public debt rose sharply across much of the developed world. Some of that spending prevented collapse. But once the emergency passed, the debt didn't disappear, it kept sitting quietly on public balance sheets, like a guest who helped out during the crisis and then permanently moved into the spare room. Debt is taxation with a time delay. It lets politicians spend today while pushing the hard choices into the future. Maybe future taxpayers will pay. Maybe future services will be cut. Maybe future inflation will ease the burden. Maybe future governments will restructure the debt and hope growth solves the problem. But sooner or later, someone bears the cost. The bill doesn't vanish just because it was printed on a bond instead of a tax form. Another hidden method is fiscal drag, one of the least dramatic yet most effective ways governments raise the tax burden without ever announcing a tax increase. Here's how the system works. Prices rise. Wages rise partially to keep pace with inflation, but tax brackets, deductions, or thresholds are frozen or updated far too slowly. On paper, your income has gone up. In reality, you may not be any richer, you're just earning more inflated money in a more expensive world. But because the tax system treats that higher income as taxable growth, you may end up paying more. This is called bracket creep. You get a raise just to keep up with inflation, and the government takes a bigger cut because the numbers on the page got bigger. Even if your real standard of living has stayed flat or fallen, the tax system can still collect more. Fiscal drag lets politicians raise the tax burden while claiming they never raised the tax rate, and it does so with all the elegance of bureaucratic paying. Then come fees, fines, tolls, licenses, permits, and charges. These are taxation under another name, usually broken into pieces small enough to avoid triggering a political explosion. Vehicle registration fees, court fees, parking fines, transit fares, road tolls, infrastructure charges, passport and license fees, administrative costs. Taken individually, each one is defensible. Governments need revenue, services cost money, roads require maintenance, courts need funding. But taken together, they raise the cost of living without the political drama of a broad tax increase. A single tax emerges as one big political fight. A fee arrives as a small annoyance repeated forever. Local governments tend to rely heavily on this, since they face rising costs but have limited revenue tools. So instead of one visible tax increase, citizens face 1,000 small toll booths. Pay to park, pay to renew, pay to apply, pay to access the internet, pay to cross the bridge. The burden gets fragmented, and fragmented burdens are easier to normalize. Nobody takes to the streets over a small administrative fee. But over time, these fees become part of the hidden cost of living within the state. Tariffs are another classic example. Politicians usually sell tariffs as a way to make foreign countries pay. It sounds strong, patriotic, and simple. But tariffs are taxes on imports. They're typically paid first by importers and largely passed on to consumers through higher prices. Sometimes tariffs do serve strategic goals. A country may use them to protect an industry, strengthen its bargaining position, reduce dependence on a rival, or defend national security. But the cost is real. Domestic consumers may pay more. Domestic firms that depend on imported inputs may face higher costs. Protected companies may come out ahead. The government collects revenue, and the public is told the bill landed somewhere else. This is exactly why tariffs are so politically useful. They look like a punishment aimed outward, but the costs usually move inward. If imported steel gets more expensive, manufacturers who use steel may pay more. If imported consumer goods get more expensive, shoppers may pay more. If foreign suppliers lower their prices to absorb part of the tariff, they may bear some of the cost themselves. But the idea that tariffs are simply paid by foreigners is usually too clean a story, and in economics, clean stories often have plenty of buried human cost behind them. On top of this, central banks add another layer. During crises, central banks can cut interest, but central bank support can also blur the line between monetary policy and government financing. When governments borrow heavily while central banks keep rates low or buy up bonds, the state can finance itself more easily. If that support goes too far, or if too much money chases too few goods, inflation can become the pressure valve. This doesn't mean every central bank action is money printing. In the cartoonish sense, the system is far more complex than that. But the political reality is simple. Governments prefer financing methods that feel painless at first. Borrowing feels easier than taxing. Low rates feel easier than austerity. Monetary support feels easier than telling voters the bill has arrived. But painless financing often turns painful later, through inflation, asset bubbles, currency weakness, or higher future interest costs. When the state can't tax openly and can't keep borrowing cheaply forever, inflation becomes the pressure valve. That's why people can feel taxed even when politicians insist taxes haven't gone up. The tax form isn't the only place the state collects. Sometimes that collection happens at the grocery store, at the gas pump, in your rent payment, in the price of imports, on the toll road, at the licensing office, at your mortgage renewal, on your utility bill, and in your interest payments. You might not see one dramatic tax hike. You just feel the world taking a little more from you every month. This is especially strong after inflation shocks. A household may get a raise, but still fall behind because prices rose faster. Then frozen tax thresholds increase the effective burden. Higher interest rates raise mortgage or debt costs. Public fees rise because of budget pressure. Tariffs or trade restrictions push up import costs. A weaker currency makes foreign goods more expensive. Public debt increases future interest payments, which then compete with spending on services. No single line item explains the squeeze. But the combined effect is unmistakable. The state and the financial system are absorbing more and more of that same household's purchasing power. None of this means taxes are bad. Taxes fund civilization. Roads, schools, courts, defense, healthcare, public safety, infrastructure, clean water, scientific research, disaster response, none of it is free. A serious society needs revenue. The issue is transparency. The issue is visibility. Taxes can be debated. Hidden taxes are harder to see, harder to vote on, and far easier to deny. A direct tax forces a political debate. Should we raise this tax? Who will pay? What consequences will it have? Is it fair? Is it efficient? But inflation, rising costs, the erosion of debt, tariffs, fees, and monetary pressures usually bypass that debate entirely. They let governments collect money through complexity. Complexity is one of the oldest refuges of power. The strongest taxes are the ones people don't recognize as taxes at all until their standard of living has already fallen, and by then they don't even notice why. So how do governments force you to pay without ever raising rates? They control the money. They borrow against the future. They let inflation erode your purchasing power. They freeze tax thresholds, pushing you into higher brackets. Instead of raising rates, they multiply fees. They impose tariffs and pin the bill on foreigners. They lean on central banks and markets to keep the debt stable. They pass costs on through prices, interest, licenses, and currency depreciation. And the reason it works is this. Each mechanism looks trivial on its own. The public feels the weight without ever seeing the architecture behind it. Financial freedom starts with recognizing that your real tax burden isn't just what shows up on a government form. It also shows up in the value of your money, the cost of your debt, the price of imports, the fees creeping into daily life, and the public debt policies shaping the future. If you only look at official tax rates, you'll miss the much quieter forms of taxation. History shows us that states have always needed resources. The honest ones collect their taxes openly. The desperate ones debase the currency. The clever ones borrow. The modern ones do all of it, and then explain it away by saying nothing was ever put on the table. And when it comes to money and power, most of the damage is hidden exactly inside that, technically. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History holds the answers. See you in the next video.